Good morning here in Brazil, good night, good evening in Japan, and good afternoon in England. So it's a pleasure being with you all here in this room, and also with the audience that we don't know exactly who is watching us. So we are in a Zoom room by the Institute for Advanced Studies of the University of São Paulo. And in this occasion, we have four speakers from different parts of the world, and they are going to discuss the relationships between the proposal of that the artist Muntadas has launched considering academia. So it's a discussion about academia from the perspective of the visual arts, of what I normally say about the visual poetics. So it's an artist that has this trajectory of analyzing systems, different systems, and of course the system of the institutional art and how the art relates to other fields of knowledge and fields of practice and action in a modern world, in a contemporary world. And in this particular work of his about academia that started in 2011 in Harvard at the Carpenter Center, Muntadas, since he has this experience of teaching in universities like the MIT, where he was there for since 1999 up to 2014. This relationship between being an artist, being active, and very with a very interesting presence in the contemporary art scene, but also as a professor and also as a researcher. So about academia comes from this experience, critical experience of being in this very interesting position, is in a strategic position within that system, or this system where we are, because we are talking from a university perspective. Muntadas then presents this exhibition that, not unfortunately, but due to the pandemic, we have decided to do it all virtually. So we are, this conference and the exhibition, they are fully transmitted, fully present in virtuality. So it's a combination of different events that we are doing to make it possible to have some sort of counterpoint to what he has brought forward with the presence of, or with the participation of different intellectuals, professors, and researchers from that scenario, from the North American context, into different contexts such as this. That in the first round table, we had a very interesting discussion about how people understand and how they project a future university, and that was very much based on the Brazilian scenario and Brazilian context. And in this opportunity with Nikki, Mariko Murata, Erika Peçanha, and David Ganj, we have the opportunity to discuss if, of course, there are the contextual scenarios of each of your conditions or situations or geopolitical relationship, but of course, this idea of still having some sort of a universitality, or this idea that university in itself is also a universal concept. So the Intercontinental Academia, to be very short, because you're going to listen from at least from David Ganch and Nikki Moore, this idea of the Intercontinental Academia that is, it's a project, and it is also an enterprise by ICA-UBIAS, University-Based Institute for Advanced Studies, a very young network that was established in 2010. and looking at a phenomena that was going on, and it's still going on, of important and very, I would say, important universities in different parts of the world started to have in their own structure institutes for advanced studies. So this pattern and this phenomena was discovered by Freiburg. They have also an institute for advanced studies there. And they decided to organize the first conference of university-based institutes for advanced studies in Freiburg in 2010. So now this network has around 43 institutes around the world. And the main, or I would say the most interesting and most prominent common project by this network is this new format, new platform called Intercontinental Academia. And the Intercontinental Academia then basically is a relationship between two different institutes in different parts of the world, where each university organizes an event of 2 weeks, bringing together senior professors, researchers, intellectuals, and not junior, but mid-career or those postdocs or those researchers that are finishing their PhD, where they can really have this experience, a very intense experience doing these 2 different weeks in each country, discussing not only the university, of course, research, interdisciplinary research, but also being in contact with different minds and different contexts as well. So it is a cultural experience, indeed, but also a very interesting way of combining different experiences in those different contexts. So from 2016, when this platform started, this project started, we had 3 intercontinental academias. The first one was was São Paulo, Nagoya, University of São Paulo, University of Nagoya, and the second one was Bielefeld in Germany and Israel Institute for Advanced Studies. So Germany and Israel. The team was human dignity, and the first one was time, and then the third one was happened in Birmingham and Singapore, discussing laws. Also in this, all of them in a very interdisciplinary format and in a very interesting way of bringing these different knowledge together to discuss those different teams. So, and under preparation, now the 4th Intercontinental Academia between France, more than one institute for advanced studies. They are doing this in a network, a local national network, and the Institute for Advanced Studies in Belo Horizonte, that's the state of Minas Gerais here in Brazil. So, and they are going to, the main focus is intelligence and artificial intelligence. So I will then start this conversation. Of course, each of you, Nikki, Mariko, David, and Erika will have some minutes to bring some ideas and to share with us your experience and your idea about what can be an intercontinental academia, but also remembering that the basis for this discussion is an artist's work that discuss the academia, but also that is impossible to discuss the academia without discussing the university in itself. So we are, I think that we are talking about values, important values that we all share worldwide regarding the academia, but also that we are related to systems and to structures such as universities that allow us to even to be here, you know, as people that have, each one of us have a different career, but have this common ground that is the university. So, Mariko, I will briefly introduce you to our Mariko is a professor at the Department of Sociology at Kansai University. She received a PhD from in interdisciplinary information studies in the University of Tokyo. She specializes in media and cultural studies and museum studies, and we met especially, we know each other from Kyoto when the International Council of Museums Congress was held there in Kyoto with almost 5,000 people. So it was a pleasure to meet Mariko there and to discuss the museum. That is also my interest, my main interest, academic interest. So she has many publications on looking at museums and museums as media. So that relationship is also very interesting regarding Muntadas' work. And last research that she was related to, or she's still related to, is the studying of museums in New Zealand. So Mariko, thank you once again to join us in this occasion, and you are very much ahead of time from us, and thank you again for that, because it's night in Japan, but the floor or the screen is yours now.
Okay, thank you, Martin. Hi, everyone. I am connecting from Osaka, Japan, which is where the COVID-19 state of emergency has just been extended again. And I'm really in the opposite side of the globe from Sao Paulo. So now it is 9 o'clock in the evening. I thank Martin, the translators, of course, and the people of the project, and the Institute of Advanced Studies at the University of Sao Paulo for having me here. Since this project is about intercontinental academia, hopefully I can contribute a little bit to this project. And because I wasn't very sure, this is my first time, I wasn't very sure what I should talk about. I will, as I said, I'll just talk about 3 things as my first remark. And one would be my self-introduction. That would include a little bit about a bit of history of the universities in Japan. Secondly, my take on Muntadas' project. And then I'll talk a little bit about the intercontinental academia, but maybe really a first remark, and maybe Nikki and David could elaborate more on that. Can I share my slide now? Okay. Can everyone see this? Can you see the slide? Yeah, okay. Okay, so this is where I am, or where I work, actually. I live in Kyoto and I commute to Osaka. So this is where my university is. It is in the western part of Japan, Osaka. And Osaka is close to Kobe and Kyoto. And most of the students here commute to the university. It's a private university. And probably one of the largest universities in Japan, probably about 10th place out of 781 universities in size. And we have 28,000 students, 800 permanent academic staffs, and 12 departments. So it's quite huge. Kansai University actually started as a law school in 1886 by judicial officers and businessmen of the time. And these founders were very much affected by the Western legal concepts, such as, human rights that didn't exist in Japan. And the history of my university, Kansai University, is typical of the foundation of the universities in Japan in the end of the 19th century. And of course, we did have this learning institutions back in the feudal ages, but the universities as institutions were made as part of the nation state building and modernization of Japan in the end of the 19th century. So the objective of these universities was to train bureaucrats that could lead the modernization of Japan. And so many foreign scholars came to Japan. They were engaged by the ministry, and they taught the young students, which were naturally super elites of that time, that would make Japan a strong country and modernize Japan. So I know that in many Western countries, the foundation of universities actually precede the nation. But in Japan, the universities were made to build the nation. So if I be very precise, university in Japan do not have an academic foundation in that sense. But of course, I'm not saying that the academia does not exist today. And as one of the members of the academia, I feel very obliged to keep fighting against the administration and also the invasion of whatever capitalism, populism, and conservatism. Well, I thought I should elaborate a little bit about the university in Japan because of today's topic, but I think I'll get back to my self-introduction. Martin explained a little bit already, but I specialize in museum studies from a media and culture studies perspective. I often say my study is about museums as media. And areas of interest include museums and popular culture. I've been doing that before, but not too much lately. Lately, I think I do a lot of study on museums and diversity, multiculturalism, and museums and decolonization, museums and representation. And of course, I'm always interested in the birth and history of museums in Japan. And so basically, I see the museum as an apparatus to see and measure the culture in which they are situated in, or maybe you could say a dispositif, which exercise a certain sort of power within a certain domain. And well, to say it maybe in a more casual way, museum seems to explain a lot about our society, both culturally and economically. According to an article of Economist in 2013, sorry, it's a bit old, but it said there were more than double the number of museums there had been 2 decades ago. So, until the COVID-19, of course, museums have been increasing. And furthermore, Japan is said to be a country of museums. Depending on how you count it, there are about 2,500 museums in Japan. And that is a lot when you think about the size of Japan. Both public museums and private museums are widespread across the country. So my recent research, as I said, focused a lot on museums and diversity recently. For example, I've been doing workshops with an art museum in Okayama Prefectural Museum of Art, in which university students create an audio guide of the artworks for the visually impaired. So the students on the left picture, you can see that they're experiencing a blinded museum tour in order to create an audio guide. And on the right, you can see that I've also made an exhibit for the visually impaired. I've also been doing research on ethnic museums in Japan. We have small museums that exhibit the culture of ethnic minorities. But they are basically run by individuals or small communities. So they are always short of money. For example, on the left, you can see the picture of the Kobe Overseas Chinese History Museum. And on the right is the Kamba Manganese Memorial Museum, which shows the remains of the manganese mines where Korean people were forced labor. It was opened by a second generation of Zainichi Koreans who came over to Japan when Japan took over the Korean peninsula. And now one of his sons run this museum. So it is really family run and it could close down any minute. This is said to be the oldest private museum of the indigenous Ainu in Hokkaido. The Ainu people are indigenous people in the northern part of Japan, Hokkaido. And perhaps it might be difficult for you to imagine because, you know, you live with so many ethnic groups. But in Japan, diversity and multiculturalism is a new issue brought about by the bidding of the Olympic and Paralympic Games, which is going nowhere now, but I'm not going to talk about that now. And until recently, the nation has long been Japan has long been identified as culturally homogenous because diversity was ignored and the indigenous people were assimilated. So when you see these ethnic museums in Japan, you can see that the issue of colonialism and also about decolonization is at stake. So that was my brief self-introduction. Now I want to talk a bit about Muntadas' work, especially focusing on about academia, of course, and also Asian protocols. Asian Protocols is a project that Muntadas exhibited in Japan, Korea, and China. And let me quote a little bit from this webpage that I'm showing you now. It says, this exhibition is an attempt to reveal visually some of the similarities and differences, as well as the conflicts that exist between three countries that are located so near to, and yet so far away from each other, namely Japan, China, and Korea, by researching the protocols operating in each of these countries, and by creating installation works as a means of assembling images collected in various places within these countries, end quote. And Muntadas also says that the exhibition is a platform that can serve as a forum for discussion, and including members of the general public, students, teachers, etc. I think his works are generally research-based art projects. And historically, of course, museums are object-based all the time. And there's a strong object fetishism in the museum. But I guess Muntadas was aware that the core of the artworks were concepts. And media artists and contemporary artists today make a lot of research-based art, which is like a half research and half art, I think. But I guess Muntadas was one of the earliest artists, a pioneer to do so. So then what is the difference between research-based art project and academic research? Or to say it more bluntly, why does it have to be art? Personally, I think the biggest difference is that art can always be subjective. And this is not a criticism, it's actually quite the opposite. I think this is very important because art is about how you see the world and how you pose questions from your point of view. And for example, Muntadas uses a lot of interviews for his projects. I saw Muntadas talk at the first roundtable. Martin sent me the link. And he emphasizes how interviews would reveal what's hidden. And he said that interviewing students raised up issues of racism, discrimination, and hierarchy. Interviews in academic research usually require objectivity, and can sometimes become very formalist. The outcomes need to eliminate contradiction and certain procedures necessary for analysis. But since methods differ according to discipline, it cannot escape sectionalism. So academic research can erase or cut off a lot of things, a lot of small things, which are important or integral, or even contradictions that are important. And moreover, this transfer of mode from interviews to visual image opens up the question or topic to a different audience. Another question, and this is closely related to the first one, why are museums and gallery spaces necessary for this kind of work? This is a question that can be posed to many of the contemporary artworks today. Brought about 2 examples. This one is a work by Monica Mayer, who's a Mexican artist, an activist and feminist. She's been doing this project, The Clothesline, from 1978. And what she does is basically she asks people in town about gender issues, such as, have you ever felt discriminated as a woman, or have you ever experienced sexual harassment, etc. And she asks them to write them down, and she exhibits them in a museum. So these are the questions, papers, and she also does that inside the museum as well, but she does it beforehand outside. So in other words, the project itself is perhaps finished outside the museum wall, but to exhibit it in the museum space makes it an art project, which invites a different audience and question the issue in a different manner. Another example, this was a work, there was an exhibition in Arts Maebashi, a small contemporary art gallery, an art museum, the ecology of expression. And in that exhibition, there was this work called Akatsuki Village Walking Tour by artist Akira Takayama. And this is what the work looks like. So it's a simple paper on a wall showing a tour map of Akatsuki Village, like this. And so this artwork is a designed village tour to a very tiny community called Akatsuki at the foothill of a mountain. And this community, it was created by a Catholic priest in 1979 as part of the Emmaus movement, which aims to support the destitute members of the society. And the community, historically, they accepted refugees from Vietnam. And after that, they accepted refugees and other people with mental illness. And today, only a few, but some still live in this. Some still live here. And so the artwork is like the promotion and design of the tour itself. So meaning that the visitors who saw this simple tour map in the museum space will have to visit on their own to this place, which is, mind you, it's quite far away. So in the museum, the work is presented as this very simple map. So again, it questions what museums and galleries are. And we can say that today, museums are spaces for questioning or for dialogue. So, and to question society using different kinds of media. And I think Muntadas' work does that. Okay, so I will finish my slide. And lastly, just a simple note about the Intercontinental Academia. I hesitate to elaborate a lot because I'm very pessimistic about it, and I told Martin that I would sound very pessimistic, and because Japan is in a different situation, I think. Martin mentioned about a mobile university or a floating university. which I totally agree, especially in this pandemic crisis, which we're obliged to stay inside the country in our home. Really, the one real good thing is that the internet allows the researchers and the students to communicate globally, and we can invite other lecturers from around the world so easily, and students can listen to it. And the academic network that we've been building is really, it plays a vital role. But in terms of classes offered, it isn't the case in Japan. And the reason is quite simple. It's the issue of language, the barrier, the big barrier of language, and the mindset barrier that follows that. So as you can see from the map, Japan is surrounded by the sea. We often say that Japan is a Galapagos, meaning it's a very close environment. So a very unique culture can evolve inside, which is interesting. But at the same time, even with the internet that this where the seas cannot block us, I think the situation hasn't changed much. And I feel that students have so limited access to a lot of information and communication outside. And maybe, I hope I don't sound too pessimistic, but I feel that one good thing perhaps is that students are now so appreciative of having a normal class in person. In Muntadas' work about academia too, I've read them, and students have much to say about how classes are run. And for us, the situation is really a challenge. So I'll stop here, and thank you for listening. Thank you.
Mariko, thank you so much for introducing us to Japan, to the university, and also by showing that you were interested on Muntadas' work and went on to research on this exhibition that was shown in Japan, in China, and Korea. So I think it's a quite I would say courageous work by Muntadas to set those questions and to questioning the similarities and the differences between those different cultures, and different civilization processes, I would say as well. So, but Japan, as you mentioned, it is an isolated country in the globe. But after returning from Japan by staying 2 months in Tokyo, researching on museums, as you know, I came with this idea that Brazil also is a quite isolated country in the world. So it's bigger in size, it's continental size, but we are quite isolated and we have strange relationship with different parts of the world. So we normally turn our backs to Latin America and look more to relationships in Europe and United States rather than relating to this quite complex situation that is Latin America with all the differences. But I will not extend on that. But I think it's interesting that you have mentioned Muntadas and trying to already start a discussion on the differences between an academic-based research and an art-based research. So they differ, and I think this is something that we probably might come back when we will open the floor for debate or for questionings and so forth. I forgot that we don't have the sequence. I don't know if Erika wants to. Maybe we can finish with the two Intercontinental researchers that we have here, or Nikki and David. They have this experience of being in with us in São Paulo and Nagoya, and also somehow participating in different results of the Intercontinental project. So, Erika, you would like to be the next one? And we start and we finish with Nikki and David? Okay. Let me introduce you, Erika. Erika Peçanha, as I said in the beginning, she is in the Institute for Advanced Study in I would say an amazing project that is coordinated by Eliana Souza Silva. Eliana is from 7 years on. She moved. Her family moved from Paraíba, that is a northeast state, to Rio de Janeiro, and the family was set in this favela. We call it a shanty town, a favela. Also, another way of describing is a community, but it's and this favela has today is the biggest complex of favelas in Rio de Janeiro, the Maré favela. So we are talking about 140,000 people living under such conditions. Unfortunately, we had a murder. The police 3 days ago, they entered another favela and killed 25 people. So the favelas in Brazil are a tension area or a zone of conflicts and of this very awkward and displaced way of dealing with the favelas in an urban situation like Rio, by showing clearly that we have a structural racism in all the being in the state structure, being in the societal structure. So once again, unfortunately, we had a crime occurring on these settings. And Eliana is an activist. She has a very interesting profile, and together with quite an interesting group at Maré, towards the end of the last century, they started to bring a different energy and a different way of looking at favelas as potentials, as places for different ideas, for different ways of acting in society. So they have been doing quite interesting works, being social, but also being works where artists are involved. So this Eliana came to us at the Institute for Advanced Studies in the context of a chair on art, culture, and science that has the name of Olavo Setúbal. And Olavo was a statesman, was a banker, but he was also a mayor of the city of São Paulo, and a very interesting figure during the military coup that we had from 64 to 84. So very much also related to the arts and culture and to university. All his his family study at USP as well. So there is a very interesting relationship between Olavo Setúbal and also the bank, Itaú Bank, and the university. And this chair has since 2015 helped very much the Intercontinental Academia to be, since we had the opportunity to bring resources to that, but also bringing different minds with different projects to the university. So Eliana brought what we call the periferia, the periphery, to the university, and how the university could or should develop a relationship with these communities. Because our campus, for example, in São Paulo, as neighbors, we have 2 favelas, so and Sem Terra and São Remo. And they are there, and they started in a way with the university because the university had this work place, and people came from different parts of Brazil to work at the campus, to the construction of the campus. So they stayed close to the campus, and it's still a very tense relationship between the university and this community. And the project that Erika is involved, she supervises. We had 74, no, Erika, young students being trained, and most of them come from favelas. It's important to you to know, since we are also talking about context, that São Paulo, 70% of São Paulo city is informal in a way. It's not like Tokyo, that I would say 99% of the Tokyo urban context is formal, or even I would say New York is a bit different, but most of these big cities, they differ quite a lot. So São Paulo has this particularity of just 30% is being where all the structure, urban structure really is available. 70% doesn't receive all the necessary urban structure. So our university lives this contradiction fully. So inequality, different values are also related to projects like this. So Erika supervises the different fronts of Eliana Souza Silva project, but one of them is very interesting, is the census of those communities that are our neighbors, be in two different campuses. And also she led the construction of a platform that brings together all the research produced related to peripheria or periferia at USP, being that PhDs or disciplines or whatever. So that will be launched on the 27th of May now. And Eliana has also, during her tenure as a chair holder, she brought a very interesting discussion about the production of art in the periphery. So that has produced, will produce, the book is now it's nearly finished. So all the debates that we had about these art productions in the periphery will come out as a book as well. So Erika, brief introduction to you. She's a cultural anthropologist. I would also say that she is a critical literary critic. So she's very much into discussing this production that is bringing quite a very interesting debate, not only at the university, outside the university. So Erika, the floor is yours.
Obrigada, Martin. Bom dia.
Thank you, Martin. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon for those who are in the UK, and good evening for those who are in Japan. I would like to start by thanking Martin Grossman to invite me to this dialogue about academia. I would also like to thank all of my colleagues who are professionals and who are helping us this morning. I proposed myself an exercise to think about the university and academia from the point of view of students. And it was based on Muntadas' work and debate about university. Part of this project, as Muntadas already mentioned, was a research study conducted with people from MIT and Harvard. We had to contrast similarities and differences between private and public university, the composition of academic departments, and so on. In my opinion, in order to increase the debate, I decided to further deep dive in some of the topics. And based on my own trajectory, I decided to produce my lecture. It's important to say that my trajectory started in an undergraduate degree from a private university, and then a post-graduation and PhD in a public university. So I will reply to this question considering the places that I occupy as an EIA researcher, as a supervisor of a project that is for students and peripheral students. And the question that I decided to answer was, historically, what do academia and university represent for me, an African-American woman from popular background and a person who lives in the outskirts of São Paulo? The university has always represented a place of prestige, production, and circulation of knowledge. But it has also always meant a place where we can increase possibilities of being able to fight for a place in the work market, but above all, in the set of relationships of society. The university which I chose to my undergraduate degree didn't dialogue much with the social aspects that I carried within. The only initiative that supported the permanence of poor people in private students was a student model similar to the one that the US has, in which people pay with interests for their education after they graduate and start working. So the authors that were the base of my training are those connected to English, European, North American origins. During my graduation, I had few Black students, and almost all the teachers were white. As it was a private university, the focus was studying. There wasn't a consolidated research group focused on research. Universities with such small numbers of opportunities still exist a lot in Brazil, especially those that are focused on poorer citizens. The university that I got to know during my post-graduation degree in 2004, Universidade de São Paulo, was a milestone in my family. My family only had one person who had a degree, my dad. All of the other people from my family were illiterate or partially illiterate. And in the post-graduation, I had one Black colleague in my master's degree. But this colleague gave up, he quit because he didn't get a scholarship. Because in order to get a scholarship, the only criteria was the social background and the grade of the person, not the social background. Back then, the department had 15 professors. Nowadays, we have 24 professors and one Black professor. When I took my PhD in anthropology, we didn't study Latin American authors. We stopped in cultural studies. This department of anthropology didn't offer me anything related to interdisciplinarity, and very little encouragement to perform interdisciplinary research. This is the private university that I'm talking about. Now, on the other hand, at University of São Paulo, I saw that was so many professors with different bibliographic references and different study groups and research projects performed in different fields of study and language courses. And so this structure of the Brazilian university makes an entire difference in the lives of students, especially those who had few resources to invest in learning other languages or traveling abroad. It was also during my post-graduation that the university meant experimentation of academic life. There, at the same time that I learned to become a researcher and to produce a dissertation, I learned a kind of ethics, a specific way of talking, a form of behaving as interactor, the dynamics of taking part as a listener and lecturer, the dispute for attention, for opportunities and projects offered by researchers and professors. From my point of view that I have today, me and my colleagues were not encouraged to question this formation of academia. It is composed by competition, difficulties in writings, pressures, and frustrations. The University of São Paulo that I got to know as a teacher, a role that I performed from 2015 to 2018, was still Eurocentric. I didn't have any Black colleague, or few changes had occurred. USP had adopted a bonus to Black students since 2016. These studies were those who worked, so they were not included in study groups and research groups. And they had to cope with the fact that people were saying that the level of the institution was dropping. It's very sad for me to know that this university today, which has half of its students originated from public studies, because it's very difficult for them to stay there. The university does not represent or show the diversity, the social and racial character, diversity of Brazil. And it still has an Eurocentric curriculum. When I was working in the university, in the Med University, I got to know that production was, productivism entered the university. People had to produce more and more articles independent from the impact they could cause. So there was something related to career production, and that didn't talk to the interest of students. And there were research products that would receive private industrial sponsorship that didn't dialogue with social demands. So I want to wrap up saying that the university are very important institutions that are alive and that are characterized by an intense production of knowledge and representation of society, representations that are contradictory many times. those institutions train concrete individuals who remain within and outside the academic world. And these subjects are characterized by social marks of class, race, territory, gender, and sexuality and gender. And I think that we can no longer neglect this aspect in the structure of university or academia. This was what I wanted to share with you. Erica, I am going to speak in Portuguese since your lecture was in Portuguese. I would like to thank you very much for your words. You talked about your background and your experience with the university. The University of São Paulo being as the most important university in Brazil, and its university only has 2.7 professors that self-intitulate themselves as Black. So, but the Brazilian population is formed by 60% of Black people. Brazil is extremely diverse, although we are undergoing a difficult moment in history. Brazil is still known as a country of diversity, of a much more pleasant relationship between citizens. It's not like Japan in Mariko or even England, David. Our history, our background as a republic, as a modern country, has a few similarities with Japan, but we are still a nation that is under formation. We have many contradictions and paradoxes that are reflected in the sphere of academia. So Eliana's project is very interesting. It's called DASP, D-A-S-P. It's called Democracy, Art, and Plural Knowledge. It's one of the first projects. I'm not saying that the work that Erica and Eliana have been doing in USP is not considered by the university, but the periphery, the outskirts, as a reality is still within the university. University of São Paulo is much closer with international values of the university than with local and contextual and regional relationships. So this equation isn't an easy one. We have to maintain an international level, being part of the ranks with an important rank, but at the same time, we have to operate and influence the society in which the university is in. I am very curious to listen to Nikki and David. Intercontinental academia is more closer to this utopic world in which it would be perfect to perform interdisciplinary activities because this world is small but complex and diverse. So universities have to focus on their local and regional realities and the global one. So thinking when we created this round table along with Muntadas, I really thought about bringing different perspectives in order to try to discuss this aspect this morning and also raise other issues. Anyways, now would like to thank once again Erica for her words. I would like to thank Erica Peçanha for her contribution. And I would like to introduce Nikki more. I met her before the Intercontinental Academia project. I got to know her research studies in the field of contemporary art and her interest in North American artistic production or art produced in the Northern Hemisphere. But I was also interested in the aspects, in the things that she creates as an art historian, and she relates different situations. She works from a point of view that was based on modernism. Modernism has this idea of continuing ideas that came from the Enlightenment, but focused on a civilizatory point of view. I was quite impressed in Japan with the huge presence of modernist museums and modernist collections present all over Japan. So Nikki's work relates this geopolitics that was ruled by the USA, which is closely related, we associate it with American imperialism, but which has also relationships with different types of political and cultural backgrounds from Latin America. Nick Moore also in the environment of the Intercontinental Academia stood out because she got involved along with other colleagues from the Intercontinental Academia to perform a project that is started in São Paulo 2016 to create a massive open online course. It's a huge name for something that is related with what we are undergoing nowadays virtually. This course is on Coursera, and one of the main online studies platform. And after a few years, the project was launched globally, and it is available on Coursera platform. And for those who are interested, visit the course name Off the Clock. She's there along with David. They are professors in the course, but they are also the organizers of the course that involved 13 young researchers who were part of the team of researchers who took part in the activities in São Paulo. So now, Nikki, the floor is yours, and we are very curious with your contribution.
Martin, thank you so much for the invitation today. Thank you for that introduction. Thank you to Ari as well and the rest of the IEA team for putting this together for each of us. And thank you to my colleagues, Erica, Mariko, and David, for your time listening here this morning. I'd like to share my screen. What I am putting together today, let's see. Excuse me. What I'm putting together today is not directly about intercontinental academia, but I would say that most of my work going forward after the experience of that project has been so largely informed by the interdisciplinarity, the multiple perspectives, the ways of looking at the world that were fostered by our very diverse group. So what I'm bringing to the table, or what I'd like to offer, is a conversation of thinking about academia, taking Muntadas' idea of his project as an artifact to be examined, as the university as an artifact to be examined, to think about academia not through the lens of what is academia, but who is academia. We ask the question, what is academia? What should it be? And as Martin mentioned, as an art and architecture historian, primarily working across the Northern Hemisphere of the Americas, from Central America through to the US, most of my examples and part of the artifacts I'm looking at come from that widespread region. So this is going to happen in 4 quick parts. The first part is, well, in honor of Muntadas' own title for his exhibition, Activating Artifacts. Then I want to consider the not what, but who. And then looking at a few campus artifacts through the lens of Masai Evaristo's conversation as part of this project, where she, in a very analytic but also confessional discourse, was talking about how she herself, the First Nation students that she is working with, don't see themselves in the architecture of the university or in the structures of academia. So I want to take that seriously for a minute. And then finally end with when. Okay, so here we go. In both the online and perhaps the physical iterations of Muntadas' activating artifacts, 3 modes of interpretation are offered. There's text, embodied speech, and space. And the space comes through the film clips of the university, the embodied speech through the different interviews, and of course text through the scrolling text that's happening both online and in the physical form. Thinking about the structure of university that Muntadas is offering us in that very setup, the idea that academia is text, embodied speech, and space emerges. There are other options. In looking at Muntadas' piece, the first thing that came to mind is an exhibition by Julian Rosenfeld, where the viewer is taken through the form of art history, a very particular 20th century North American with 1 or 2 South American additives or points of input. It's a very, very narrow and particular dialogue about what art should be, what it is, and what it should do. As you move through Rosenfeld's exhibition, the sound cones above each station only allow you to truly engage with the film in front of you, which is acting out one of these manifestos, whether it's the Surrealist Manifesto or the Futurist Manifesto of what art should be, by standing directly in front of it. You have visual multiplicity, but you can only hear one thing. Until after about 8 minutes of conversation, all of the voices, and you see them here acted out by Kate Blanchett, unite as one. They read one key line of one of the manifestos together, and then the screen shift. In that setup, if we think about what sort of modality of knowledge is being offered in manifesto, for example, there is a linearity. You move from one manifesto to the next screen to the next. As you move through, and you might walk away with an idea that you have an understanding of art history, albeit a very particular and quite narrow one, limited primarily to the sort of canonical white Western art historical points of view. In moving back to Muntadas' piece, what we have is the possibility, particularly in the online format, of multiplicity of a multimodal form of intake, right? If you are on that primary screen in the online exhibition, you can see 6 different events happening. You can hear at least 2 voices, and you have exposure to a multitude of campuses or campus images. And again, even in that multiplicity, we still have the embodiment of the university as text, embodied speech, and space. What's being offered in that embodied speech through the discourses of the students, particularly in academia too, are the viewpoints of capital, or the impact of capital on the university, on the shape of academia, racism on the shape of academia, and hierarchy, right? And in the faculty speech and conversation, we have a more analytical, probing, even in a grammatical way, of what academia is. In each possible iteration, the question is still, what is academia? And again, as mentioned, I'd like to think not what is academia, but who is academia? And I'd like to turn to an artist, Danielson Baniwa, who is asking the question, not about academia, right? But what is Brazil? What are the spaces that make up Brazil? What is it to, in his case, to be a Baniwa artist who is trying to show the world not what it is necessarily or only to be an Indigenous or First Nations artist, but what that viewpoint, what that lens offers everyone in Brazil, right? There's a specificity to his work that has a broader universality to it. What is it to reclaim territory? In the image we're seeing here, he stands in front of the Pinacoteca, yes, which is the State Museum of Sao Paulo, holds a very important contingent of Brazilian art. And here we see Baniwa reclaiming that territory in a very physical way, right? Growing something new from the very soil that has been colonized on this colonized space, showing us another way of thinking about what art is, what academia in the sense of that rarefied knowledge of really thinking truly and deeply about what things are, thinking about research. And he shows that by a physical re-embodiment of the soil, right? Very powerful work. And as an anthropophagic artist or as part of the history of the cannibalist movement, right? He is digesting the world around him, digesting modern, contemporary, global, universal, any stance you want to take, culture, and repositioning that, bringing it back, digesting it, and bringing us into something new, right? It's not the take of the modernists, of Andrade and the other modernists who, as largely white European descendants, saw themselves as taking on this role. In this case, we have a First Nations artist truly digesting and reclaiming, right? The question of not what, but who has sprung up or has at least come to the fore, right? It's certainly been there for, in the US, at least 300 years. But front and center, in the middle of the media, taking over our mental, visual, and emotional spaces for the last year. The Black Lives Matter movement has transformed what happens on campuses, how we're thinking about campuses. And it needs, the Black Lives Matter movement is doing everything that can be done. We as part of academia are in the position where it's imperative on us to respond, right? It is imperative on us to transform not what the university is, but who the university is. Who are the faculty? Who are the students? How do we further recognize the difference, the racial difference in staff? And how do we think particularly and explicitly about what texts we're reading, as Erica so poignantly pointed out, right? What are the case studies students are receiving? Who are the authors they're reading? Who are the scientists that they are looking to, right? So in thinking not about what academia is, but who academia is, this just reaches all the way down. And of course, as an art and architectural historian, I want to see that for just a minute through architecture. I want to look at that in the reverse for a moment, to think about what has happened when the what of academia comes before the who. So bear with me for just a quick couple of case studies. The first one, I want to look at the National University of Colombia in Bogota, as well as my own current employer, Wake Forest University in North Carolina. What I'm showing you here is a campus plan for the National University of Colombia, created by the architect Leopoldo Rother and an urban planner who supported the need for the university in Bogota at all. I don't think Freud could have even dreamt up this campus plan. So let's just walk through it real quickly. We're looking at a plan, so an aerial view, right, of the campus itself. And if we begin with the image on the left, I pointed out to you here, we have this, something like an egg nestled in the middle of the campus, right? Kind of snuggled in by this landscape around it. As you begin to study the map of what the different buildings are on campus, as Rother has drawn them, the egg is hovering here above this plinth that is the School of Zoology. This is the plan for a building, very simple, elegant plan for a building. That is being fed by the lifeblood of the campus, right? These sports stadia down here. So the idea that, this is the healthy, exercised animal that is supporting the egg that hovers. We move to the second image and you see each of the different schools that would be built on campus, and they sort of open, surround, center, still that egg in the middle. And then by the time we get to the third image, all of those different schools, mathematics, literary studies, etc., open to the School of Philosophy at the top. This phallic-shaped building, it's not even subtle, right? The job of philosophy, the knowledge, the love of wisdom is going to penetrate the sort of origins of life or of nature here. As part of this, what goes on to be a quite explicit eugenics scheme for transforming the Colombian populace into an ever more whitened group. Right, this horrible sort of white supremacy that makes itself known in this bizarre plan. When the goal of academia, this sort of ever more westernizing, but we would probably say northernizing vision for what the country should be, takes this odd and bizarre form. This is not the final design for the campus. This was scratched. People looked at it and said, no, no, it's just too weird. But it did exist and it was considered. Let's move on to my current employer here. So what I'm showing you is first an overview of Wake Forest campus circa 1958 on the left when the university was completed. Just keeping in mind it was built in the mid 20th century. In the middle, this is the steel and concrete set of our armature for the building, which is Waite Chapel, sort of central building for lectures and a variety of different services on campus. And then on the far right, we have the recent apology of President Hatch apologizing to the campus for Wake Forest's involvement in the institution of slavery, an involvement that included the sale of 16 enslaved persons in order to purchase and build the campus itself, an involvement that included the 4 early presidents being enslavers themselves. And it's not as if that history wasn't already obvious in the look of the campus, right? Muntadas did this beautiful job of speaking to this, what we think of as like the North American campus, right? And it often looks something like this: brick with all of these different, very particular features. And those particular features come from the colonial history of the United States. But much like we're currently in the midst of an ongoing discourse about whether or not Confederate monuments should be held, or people from the Civil War, enslavers from the Civil War, whether their monuments should still stand in public spaces. Those monuments, as well as these university structures, weren't built when the US was founded. They weren't even built during the Civil War, most of these. They were built posthumously as a form of white nationalism that was looking back to an idealized and nostalgic era that didn't actually exist, right? But in their minds, it was a time when America was white, which of course it was not. It draws this sort of campus architecture draws on Georgian style architecture that comes straight from the UK. You can see explicitly the ways in which it draws from Greco-Roman architecture, temple architecture in particular, all of which is to try to claim for these American universities a very European historic lineage. The idea at the time was that these university structures would represent something truly American. There would be an architecture that was truly American. And of course, as I'm showing you, that isn't the case unless you align Americanness with a very particular kind of white European trajectory. If we wanted to truly think about an American form of architecture, as other architecture historians have pointed out, we might look to the Pueblos of Taos. We might look to some of the earlier indigenous forms that were here to truly think what is North American, right? We might look to the Cherokee, the Lumbee, the Saura, the Catawba people who lived on the land where Wake Forest has now settled and occupied. So in thinking about not what, but who of the university, part of what the campus does is create an advertisement for the school, right? It creates not just the logo or image, but it also creates the setting in which learning will be conducted. And how can we think about expanding the who of academia if we don't interrogate the architecture in which we're structuring it? If we continue to create campuses that look like this very white colonial historical image, we're alienating a full body of students who have so much to bring to the campus. If we continue to think about physical architecture, right? This is something that intercontinental academia really probed. Do we need a space? Do we need physical buildings, rooms, et cetera, to conduct the work in? And of course, as COVID has just like blown up for us, is that really required? Can more be opened up if we don't require people to travel to one particular place to meet together in these historically alienating frameworks? So as we think about not what, but who, the question is always when, right? If not now, when? And to this, I want to look again to give credit to this question to Alton Krenek, who was again part of the earlier series of talks. He said specifically something that really stood out to me is, if we erase the 20th century, the university is a colonial structure. It doesn't interrupt or transform anything. And I agree with him, except to say that even if we include the 20th century, it's still a colonial structure and it doesn't interrupt or transform anything yet. That is the extent of my conversation today. I look forward to talking about how intercontinental academia reshapes or offers alternatives to the sort of setup that I have run through here. And I look forward to a conversation with you to follow.
Thank you so much, Nikki, for this. So I think you, as I said, just before your talk, you were doing it quite well of opening up and bringing more questions to what we start with. So we definitely have already quite an interesting material to look at and to come back when we start the debate. But let's hear David Ganj. I mistake myself, or I always don't know exactly how to say your surname, David. So Ganj or you correct me when you start your presentation. But he, as Nikki and other 13 researchers I met then from early 2016, when we had all the curriculums and all the proposal for your proposal to join the Intercontinental Academia. So we know each other quite well in that sense of being not only together but also following your research or different researches. No, so David is a senior lecturer in modern history and in the history department of the university, Birmingham University. I think I don't know exactly how he's going to conduct his contributions today, but David has a very interesting way of also relating himself as an academic to the real world. He also is a sportsman. He likes to be in nature, being what nature might be nowadays, but he's out there as an individual, but trying to bridge different situations and different conditions. He's a quite brave man in that sense, because with his small kayak, he's been doing a quite interesting research about the relationship between the sea and the communities around the sea, or the landscapes and different environments in that relationship between earth and water. So I think it's a brief introduction to you, David, but I think it's, I don't know exactly, but I see yourself as a quite complex man, so, or human being, to be more exact. So please come forward, and we are very much looking forward for your talk.
Thank you very much, Martin, for that introduction, and thank you so much for the invitation to be here. It's just a great honor for my name to be included here. I don't mind how it's pronounced, so I'm not going to provide any kind of correction. And it's also, so it's been a great privilege to be able to explore Muntadas's work over the last few days and begin to think about some of the really profound questions it raises. And also it's an enormous privilege to be here alongside the three speakers we've already heard, whose contributions were really profound and significant, and I have no idea how I'm supposed to follow them. So thank you very, very much, everyone, for those, and also to the interpreters for making all this possible. It's been great to have access to talks in other languages and to have my talk available for people to hear through other languages too. It's a wonderful thing. So yeah, what I intend to do today is to try and give a kind of personal perspective on what intercontinental academia meant to my career, how it informed my relationship to the university structures that I work in, and why I think that open space to study in a truly international and transdisciplinary context is so important. And so I think it should indeed be part of the model for the future of the university. And then, yeah, also how it relates to the social roles of, in particular, the arts and humanities, as Muntadas's project illuminates them for us. So I took part in the first Intercontinental Academia at a kind of point when my career was at a bit of a crossroads, when I was not as complicated as Martin has suggested I am. So I just published 2 books that were firmly within my own discipline with UK university presses. And I was feeling quite equivocal about the process and experience of doing that, feeling like the opportunity that offered to make any kind of difference was not really all that great. And despite my relatively narrow experience, I'd just been given the role in my university department of writing and running the teaching of theory and method to both undergraduate and graduate students. So yeah, the need to branch out intellectually, as well as in terms of engagement beyond the academy, felt really intense at that stage. I was thinking a lot about the purpose of doing history at all, and looking for approaches that could make sense of the kind of links between historical thinking, the academy, and the world. And I think it's really crucial to have outlets at that stage beyond the next research paper or grant proposal for that kind of wider reflection. And of course, some of those frustrations were born out of exactly the elements of the corporate university that Muntadas' work is so unflinchingly revelatory about. So the nature of the problems of our world isn't really kind of that obscure. It's clear that they've mostly been created by the growth-based economics and colonial politics that the Enlightenment and modern Western thought raised to primacy. Those economic orthodoxies that are the source of both our vast inequality and of our rapacious destruction of our ecosystems. So it's clear that's not just Western politics, but Western science that's facilitated those things or even created them. Those problems that Western science itself kind of claims to be able to solve for us. And the work of the corporate university, I think, has been to co-opt academic progression and intellectual production into that orthodoxy of growth, of progress, of conventional economic logic. And in so doing, university structures have worked to marginalize a key purpose of both visual art and the humanities, which is the role of imagining alternatives to that. When we're tied to impact agendas and instrumental roles in national economies, the kind of wings that ought to allow us kind of creative, imaginative, alternative perspectives are clipped, and our potential plurality of worlds is diminished in service to a kind of singular growth-based path to the future. So I applied to Intercontinental academia looking for some kind of intellectual rejuvenation and both kind of disciplinary and geographic expansion of horizons. And that really is what I felt I got from the experience. And it's through being based at USP and also at PUCI briefly that I was introduced to several thinkers who've become crucial to all I've done later on, such as Eduardo Viveros de Castro. And I remember during the project coming across a quote from Bruno Latour and thinking, yes, this is what the things we're doing should be about. So I'm going to share my screen for the rest of the talk. I just wanted to begin without the screen shared. So this was the Latour quote. That in the end, the only thing that matters is not whether you're for or against globalization, for or against the local, but how to record, maintain, and cherish the greatest possible number of ways of belonging in the world. And it was also while thinking through things for the project that I was exposed to the range of ways in which photographers and visual artists and indeed architects have approached the past. With the wildly different temporalities our project was about time that they've employed and the vast potential those have for informing our present. So those all spoke directly to that kind of role of the academy in imagining other ways of being and in displacing Western thought that I think are our only hope, not just as intellectuals, but as a species. So of these, the approach of the theorist of photography, Ariella Azoulay, seemed to me the most powerful. So Azoulay argues that the past is alive, that kind of our traditional temporalities are just really all wrong. She says that when working with early photography, we don't have to relegate the things we work on to a foreclosed past, as she puts it. And she says, our approach to the archive cannot be guided by the imperial desire to unearth unknown hidden moments. It should rather be driven by the conviction that other political species were and continue to be real options, which surely is a kind of huge part of our project as universities. So this overturns that usual sense of the relations of past, present, and future. And in this potential history, our entirely unsustainable present is kind of the dead thing. It's like a single toxic offshoot from a kind of whole array of living pasts that colonialism and Enlightenment political economy crushed. So the vestigial present is the product of wrong turns that began with the attempts to spread Enlightenment political economy to every inch of the earth, kind of 17th, 18th century. And one thing the arts and humanities can contribute to our present is visions of alternatives drawn from the potential futures of the prematurely severed pasts. So then that new political economy made itself seem inevitable by aiming to discredit competition, so every other worldview, dismissing all other cultures as backwards by judging them only on its own terms. And as another advocate of this potential histories approach puts it, if the work of modernity is in effect to obliterate both the memory and the present consciousness of its violence, and to naturalize progress as the self-evident form of human time, then the ruin, the kind of ruins of the past, stands a kind of uneroded sill that both recalls destruction and comes into conjunction with the obstinate refusal in the present to accept that there are no alternatives. So this, I came to believe that part, and thanks to Intercontinental academia, is where the historical imagination finds its métier. And there are obvious consequences of accepting these ideas. One is that Indigenous First Nations scholarship, Indigenous philosophies, and Indigenous science need to be elevated to the highest possible status in our academies, not filtered through anthropology, but as knowledge systems themselves. Not just the really important thing of making sure that all our potential students can see themselves reflected in faculty and in the thinkers presented as authorities, but also the kind of opposite of that too, so that all students are exposed to the full diversity of ways of being in the world. So Indigenous perspectives express ideas that are going to be crucial to the reinvention of self and society in the kind of necessary transition to new ways of living and of being. And overcoming those structural problems, the power dynamics of race and gender and social class that prevent that happening are obviously our most urgent priorities as universities, as the academy. And with the increasingly diverse and activist student populations around us, processes of reverse mentorship are obviously a huge part of this. We can't allow the university structures and attitudes of the present to be replicated in future through the persistence of hierarchies that currently exist. So my own kind of first response to the wealth of methods and perspectives that circulated around that Intercontinental academia project was to try and produce some research-based work for a wider non-academic audience. To step as far out of my discipline as I dared, and to look at the island group that I'd come from the perspective of its many marginalised Indigenous small languages, such as Scottish Gaelic, Irish, Welsh, and Shetland, rather than from the inland English-speaking city. So like Martin says, my method, I don't know if you can actually see the boat because of where the pictures of people come here, but my method was to take this small kayak and to paddle 2,000 kilometers of Atlantic coastline. So armed with a camera and the materials to conduct interviews, continuing to learn the language of the coastlines, and kind of spend time in archives. So sleeping rough, outdoors, by or above the water, with no tent or anything each night, and spending time in boat workshops with people helping out in the construction of these deeply traditional vessels and hearing stories of the ocean. So collaborating with artists and poets, as well as with boat builders and crofters and fishers. So this was the root of that, and its logic was simple in that it could overturn the perspective conveyed by British national histories. So 7 of the 12 legs were in Scotland, while only one, the very last, touched on England, and towns were barely a feature at all. So I'd done half the journey before I reached the second town that had more than 600 people. A large proportion of the journey was through regions where English wasn't a predominant first language, whether regions of Shetland, Gaelic, Irish, or Welsh speakers. And of course, regions that open to the ocean have been open to a kind of vast geographical influence. So a lot of this coastline, for instance, of Ireland here shows connections with China centuries before it shows connections with England, kind of anthropologically speaking. And yet the languages of these coastlines have a 2-century history of resisting standardization, national integration, and extractive capitalism. They have vocabularies and philosophies that are much more entangled with place and environment, what Elizabeth Povinelli has called geontologies. And I want to construct a history of the Irish and British Islands written from the perspectives of those language communities that kind of marginalized the kind of urban spaces, the kind of Southeast perspectives and the English language. So I was conceptualizing these coasts as sites of encounter, marginalized in modern history because that inland Enlightenment political economy had found them so difficult to integrate. And so I tried to wipe the languages and the cultures out of existence. So like the 150 indigenous languages of North America or the 160 indigenous languages of Brazil, the Celtic and Nordic languages of Irish and British Islands embody ways of being and traditions of opposition 3 or more centuries old, of which the world is in desperate need. So a global turn integrating these perspectives is now kind of increasingly widely advocated through concepts such as eco-linguistics, as championed by Michael Cronin. He talks about situating the Irish language in the context of indigenous ecological struggles. So yeah, in the book that resulted from this, Fred Atlantic Edge, the kayak and the camera speak to the significance of doing and being and living, the importance of perceptual experience, elemental and interspecies entanglement, and to geo-ontologies as perspectives kind of equally significant to the propositional knowledge that modernity has so profoundly privileged. So yeah, the question ultimately, in a world where all of culture is being co-opted into this increasing enthusiasm for the nation and these kind of myths of national identity that come with that, is how we make the case for approaches that are clear-eyed about the biggest problems we confront and aim to imagine how things could be different. And so in Britain, the press and government now increasingly conceptualize the decolonizing agenda as doing Britain down. The humanities are presented as unpatriotic because not exclusively celebratory of these myths of national past and present. And in kind of putting measurable contribution to the national economy above the possibilities of freely imagining alternatives, the corporate university obviously aligns itself with that delimiting of academia's role. So it feels like we're remarkably quickly losing sight of the idea that imagining alternatives, kind of exploring alterity, is a public good. And it feels to me like our only hope in the arts and in the humanities and in the sciences is surely in making the case that a plurality of worlds, a diversity of perspectives, is a kind of fundamental underpinning of any healthy society. Only then is there a potential for our funding models to be moved away from the crippling individualism and economic instrumentality of funding based purely or mainly on student fees. And that's where a project like About Academia, which gives us both the data to analyze the problems we confront and the artistic interpretation to conceptualize it, makes for such a powerful complement to the project of Intercontinental Academia. So spaces for thinking big outside of national frameworks and far outside our disciplines are far too rare, and spaces where academics are put into collaboration with a true diversity of perspectives are rare. So too are spaces where process rather than output is the point. And it's especially crucial, I think, that Intercontinental Academia gives early career academics opportunity to do something that's both prestigious and not career instrumental in the usual way, allowing them to step outside a linear, goal-oriented model of what a research and a teaching career actually means, to reflect about purpose on a global scale. I'd obviously love to see the movement diversify its perspectives still further, bringing Indigenous perspectives and institutions to its core, tackling directly the existential kind of eco-crises of our age. But it's already a kind of modern manifestation of how we can hold true to the threat and values of academia without getting nostalgic for a past in which the benefits of greater freedom and time were outweighed by the problems of lack of diversity and of limitations to access. So I think I will stop there and hand back to Martin. But thank you very much.
Thank you, David. That was great, and I'm very glad that we have finished this first stage of our encounter, and with brilliant performances of each of you. So we have a diversity this morning of perspectives, of different ways of seeing the possible relationship between an artist's work like Muntadas and his About Academia, and your own researches, but also some more straight and precise questions of what is the role of universities nowadays, no? Considering that you all have touched in those subjects or those objects, or even the who are we talking about, why we have those structures, and who is related to this system of higher education and the purposes of that, no? So we have a lot of things to discuss, but rather than I directing the way that we should go forward, I really think that the first moment now that we still have some time, and I really open the floor for you to bring forward questions to each other, or to go back to what you have said in relationship to what the others have said. So it's open, but now in this first moment between us, and then so far we haven't received any questions, and I there is a email on the screen on our YouTube station where you can send your questions to, and some of them are going to be, or most of them are going to come forward to our speakers. So please feel free to send them to us. So Nikki, David, Erika, Mariko. A silence. Come on, no questions.
So I was particularly inspired by the idea of DASPI, and I was wondering if Erika could tell us a little more about DASPI itself.
Você entendeu, Erika? Ele está querendo saber um pouco mais sobre o projeto do DASPI.
Bem, esse projeto foi iniciado em 2018.
The project was launched in 2018 in IAD USP. It was created by Eliana Souza Silva, and it's grounded in 3 main actions. One of them is called peripheral centralities, which gathers artists and academics who think about initiatives within the peripheries. The second action is a platform called Connection USP Peripheries. It's a multidisciplinary data bank that systematizes and gives visibility to USP initiatives focused on poor communities. It shows graduation courses, extension projects, research groups, and groups of students who that have as protagonists subjects from favelas. And it also includes projects that aim in subjects from the favelas. And the third initiative is a census that is being conducted in the surrounding communities of USP. And the objective of this census is to gather information about the people who live in the surroundings. This census started in 2019, and it was finished in March 2020. More than 15,000 people were interviewed, so we have a significant database to be able to start thinking about the peripheral surroundings of USP. And based on the information of the inhabitants and their households, we gathered information with regards to pets that these people have, and we also gathered information about the community life of those communities by mapping local leaders, and as well as the presence of religious groups and local initiatives. So 72 students from the University of São Paulo have already graduated as a result of this project. And the project also included in the group responsible for carrying out the census inhabitants of those areas. So those individuals were important because they advertised the census, and they also contributed with information. They produced their own analysis on this experience and helped us as well. So this is a little bit about the project.
Can I ask a bit more about that? I think because Martin mentioned how the University of São Paulo is sort of next to this favela area, this really poor area, and because Erica did a project asking people around there, I was wondering how the residents reacted to this interview itself, because from their point of view, Erica, you are sort of part of the elite system, and so. Is there like a tension, or are they happy to have the university there, which is like the best university in Latin America? Could you elaborate a little bit about the relationship that you built or the tension that's there?
Essa tensão esteve presente desde o início do projeto.
This tension was present since the beginning of the project, even because those favelas, those communities, are neighborhood to the University of São Paulo. One of them, São Remo, occupies a plot of land that belongs to the University of São Paulo. And due to this geographic relationship, these territories, these areas are kind of used as research laboratory research from students and teachers. They also receive projects that focus on the approximation of the exchanges of the university and its surroundings. But there are also different types of research studies that, from the point of view of those who live in the favela, don't dialogue much with their reality. And besides this, they say that some of the research studies don't give back the results to the community. So the people from favelas, they relate with professors and students for a little while, and then after the study is finished, they don't get to know what their contribution was used for, and also there's no contribution to their local situation. So, but there's also something that is important with regards to those who conduct studies in those areas. If students with a profile that is more similar to the profile of those who live in the surroundings would lead to a better response. This is why those projects are usually conducted by students from the peripheries and Black students. And the projects are created based on the way in which knowledge can be built with, for, and about peripheral areas. So this was an important topic discussed by the project. And besides this, there was also the presence of inhabitants of those communities in the studies. They were important because they advertised this study within the community, but they also contributed with this relationship of content and the surroundings, and they also helped to produce the results.
But Erika, thank you so much. But I would just add something, Mariko, that is very interesting, and I think that really makes a difference in this case from the previous researches. I think first of all is that sense that most of the people living in this community, they see themselves as guinea pigs for different projects of the university. So the university does not has a specific project regarding itself and its neighbors. There is a wall in both of the campus that have this relationship being studied or that the census was applied to. They are all walled communities, as Nikki has shown in the example from Bogota in Colombia. No, that's sort of really sort of a encaste or this community that really segregates itself from the others. No, but I think what is interesting about Eliana is that she's someone that comes from the favela. And she's the one that is part of this new group that we have in Brazil. That they are very political. They are very active. They have developed a very interesting way of relate to the different centralities. So to money, in a sense, or also to the elite society that is like me, white. And negotiating and really sort of starting to change some not only the relationship but also the situation. And we really with this project that also I'm engaged with as an academic coordinator is to change the politics, university politics regarding not only its neighborhood, but also the way that the university relates to society at large, you know. So, and I just want to note also to remind you all that we have Ari Plonsky with us. So the director of the institute is also this morning, as he was in the first round table. So I don't know if Ari wants to say something to us.
Yes, yes. Good morning. I'm extremely happy to. Should I talk in English or in Portuguese? I feel if we are, I feel that if we are decolonializing, I should speak neither in English nor in Portuguese, but in some local language. But as I'm not familiar with the local languages of the original inhabitants, I'll continue in English. But I'm extremely happy. I was so much impressed by all this, all of you that spoke, and each of one had a fantastic way of contributing to the subject, provoked by Muntadas, and I think that just continue. And I have a meeting in an hour about ICA-4, so particularly seeing Nikki and David and seeing the connection And Martin, you were the I would say the genius behind ICA-1 and now this activity. I'm very happy. Just continue. I'll be with you.
So, between us here.
I suppose one question that comes up for me in listening to your further explanation of this fascinating project, Erica, and in your response, Martin, but really, I guess it originates from Muntadas' original project. Part of this discourse of center periphery, right, is always that it needs to be deconstructed. If the percentage of the periphery is larger than the center, you know all that. But the thing that came up for me in Muntadas' video is he's done Academia 1, he's done Academia 2. I think it would be fascinating to see a third channel of this that is asking non-academics what academia or what are their ideal learning processes, right? If we ask about what academia is from inside academia, we get a very self-congratulatory response, or critical, but still, So that I appreciate, Erica, that the project that you're engaging with is doing that work in a rigorous manner. And I think that might reflect back and into Muntadas' project if and as he continues to think about it. That's more of a statement than a question.
Érica, você tem alguma pergunta, Érica? Para os nossos...
Erica, do you have any questions to our colleagues?
No, I have a question to Mariko, because it's as I said to you regarding my research on museums, I was fascinated by this structure of museums in Japan, and you shared with us how the importance of museums in Japan, but also questioning myself, asking myself, why the university in Japan? It's a complex story. We know we can't actually go deep into that now. But how do you see this modern Japan? Because I think in the museum scenario, I really thought, looking at the different museums, the different typology of museums in Japan, that the museum started to be decolonized from the Occidental, from the European standards, by, as Nikki was mentioning in her talk, by really investing in different architectures. Of course, it's still a sort of a capitalist architecture, is like a very present and also quite expensive architecture, I would say, of museums that stand up as as singular spaces. But in a way, I see those or this new architecture, museum architecture in Japan, associated to temples. That's why I also, during my 2-month stay in Japan, I visited or revisited Kyoto and also visited Nara and also in Tokyo to see different. And also I went to houses, Japanese houses, because I wanted to understand the basics of space. How Japanese relate to their own space, to their private space, in a sense. Not the modern space, I would say, but this space that has be with your cultural standards for centuries. So how do you see this relationship? Do you think that universities are changing in Japan? Like maybe we in a good willing and more utopic way we are looking at Brazil, and even with the talk by Nikki and David, I can see that, you know, you as a new generation, you are bringing new ideas to the university in itself. Of course, maybe we are still a smaller part of that, but somehow I really think that the university is in an interesting moment of questioning itself and looking at new possibilities. No, is that happening in Japan?
Right. Okay. Difficult question, but well, thinking about museums and universities together, and referring to Nikki's presentation, I think in Japan, you know, all the universities and museums started out as a colonial architecture, but it didn't have a colonial meaning at all. And so that's very different, meaning that they thought the colonial style was a symbol of modernization. So when Japan occupied Korea and Taiwan, they made lots of buildings, European buildings, colonial style building, because they thought that was modernization. So it has a completely different context or different meaning. And I think Japan is like the only country which wasn't colonized, but wanted to make like the same thing, like wanted to copy the style. So it has again, maybe you could call it Galapagos, but that sort of different meaning is at stake. And in terms of museums, Martin just said that he saw a lot of museums that used Japanese buildings, Japanese houses. So that would mean that like the museum, in the context of architecture or space, I think the Japanese museums or sort of indigenized the Western museums. For the universities, I'm not really sure. For example, a lot of the universities are still use colonial style architecture, and there were a lot of universities that were made in the 90s, and they have a more modern style architecture. But then that also comes from, I don't know, Corbusier or, you know, the Western style anyway. So I think in university there is a stronger than museum, strong image of Western ideology still now.
So we don't have questions from the floor or from our audience. So I don't know if maybe Ari has some questions now, or if we continue on asking questions to each other.
I have a question, Martin.
Great.
And the question is easy. It's for whoever would like to address it. We talked a lot and in a very important way about how we came, the situation, the consequences. If each one of you could provide, each one of you would like to provide a suggestion for a university in São Paulo, in this case, whoever knows University of São Paulo, Erica knows, David knows, Nikki knows, Mariko knows also? No, doesn't know. But anyhow, if you would like to provide a concrete suggestion about how we could move forward. We are an Institute for Advanced Studies, so our motto is advance, and we would like to advance in a better way or a different way, let's say, that maybe we advanced during our first 34 years. So a suggestion would be very much welcome.
This isn't a suggestion, but I think in Sao Paulo, there are a lot of Japanese origin people. Are they related, or are there many Japanese roots people in University of Sao Paulo?
I may answer you, Mariko. Yes, I studied engineering, and the amount, for instance, of Japanese origin people, Nisei, Sansei, etc., particularly at the engineering school at my time, made the school get a nickname in a nice way. Instead of Polytechnic, Nippotechnic. So the answer is yes. We have, and nowadays, what in the beginning, it's traditional by immigrants to have first the more, let's say, basic professional careers, such as engineering. But nowadays, you see descendants from, I would say, from East Asia, Chinese, Japanese, Koreans, in all schools, and the percentage is very high, proportionally, yes.
Yeah, okay.
Ari, I appreciate your question. Rather than being able to speak to how USP might change, because I certainly, I think we would need to spend a lot of time there in order to have the insight on what's happening. But experiences so far have, of course, been fantastic with the IEA and USP. One of the things I love about the work that I do is looking at the Mexican modernists, the Brazilian modernists, the Uruguayan modernists, right? And thinking about how, in order to set out a future, they looked to who they were before contact, right? In the pre-contact era, who were they before, in order to think about who they would become. And I think, let's speak for the North American context, North Americans, we are far, far, far behind in this. You know, we lag far behind the Mexicans, for example, and thinking about who we are and then building a future from that base forward. So my suggestion to my own nation, I guess, which I might say, I don't know if this is something you might consider as well, is just thinking about who are we, and who are we, you know, who were we? Who is here in the past? Who is here presently? In a real robust mode of thinking about that, you know, who should be here that is not, and then building from there. That's my point of view on it.
Thank you, Nikki.
I agree completely with everything Nikki just said. And I would also be extremely hesitant to give advice to USP in these terms, because I think USP does create space for open discussion and reflection far better than most British universities currently do in that framework. So I wouldn't want to provide direct, any kind of sense of direct advice like that. But I do think what is lacking in universities currently is space for people to think outside of frameworks that are specifically career instrumental. So those kinds of setups, those kinds of fora where people from very, very diverse backgrounds can be brought together just to discuss things without having to create any kind of output, without having to think about where this is going. I think putting funding into that kind of setup is the kind of thing that would benefit every university at the moment.
Thank you, David. I would say that it's obviously also my dream. Sometimes financial agencies that support the research are more, but more frequently they are less, I would say, attentive to such a proposal. But I agree 100%. the institute was created in 1986 by Professor Goldenberg, that you met, you heard him, and when I was really preparing to take over the directorship together with Rosalie, parenthesis, for the first time in 34 years, we have a woman in the direction, in this case, as a deputy director of the institute. Until now, we're only men, not to say that only white men. I would say that in another context, you had also minorities in the sense of persecuted minorities in history. We had one director before who was a Jew, and myself also. And Jewish history is also a history of suffering. But the parenthesis closed. I looked what Professor Goldenberg wrote, and he wrote that he wants the Institute to be a place where different people with different ideas come together and they can talk about that and they can confront the ideas. And I think that's what you're saying basically is what Professor Goldenberg suggested since the beginning. So you're reinforcing. So again, thank you again to Nikki, and thank you. And I would very much like to hear Erika. I was fascinated by your story, Erika, in spite of we sharing. May talk in Portuguese to Erika, if you don't mind. Erika, eu fiquei super tocado pelo teu relato.
Erika, I was very touched by your narration. I didn't know your previous path before University of São Paulo, and I thought it was very important that you, on one hand, valued the general public university and USP specifically. And I believe that that's the look, the vision that we have to have, and not just being a patriot and say that everything is cool and not also not being destructive, saying that there's nothing to be used, nothing useful there. Yeah, so you gave me a notion of a certain balance, and given that, perhaps you can give one or two suggestions. If you feel comfortable about that, you'd be more than welcome.
Eu penso que eu sou uma cientista social, né? Então, quando
I'm a synthesist in my social relationships in the context I live in, and I bring to floating.
Minha fala tem a ver com isso, né? Não à toa fui
my talk has to do with that. I think of different. I'm not thinking only about different historic moments and different institutions where I had to assume different functions as a student, as a researcher, as a teacher. And considering all that, I am thinking notes that I've taken down here. I love to hear Nikki, Mariko, as to the role of art to put up questions, issues. I'm not a Marxist or an art researcher in my literature to think of periphery contexts, but I believe that every project on the academy, to think on the academy, leads me to think of what answers would I give, to put up my trajectory and bring answers to this university, the university I would like to see. So the university I'd like to see is a university that hears, that listens to students and maps up the platform to... And the platform has brought a number of students to this dialogue on the university. So what was forecasted for the university structure, which is a kind of formal organ of representativity of the students, we have now the students' collective organizations. They are marked by discussions on gender, race, sexuality. So I was thinking of the importance of generating a channel of communication that would be more proliferous among these collective organizations. When I was a teacher in USP, I created an event that was a pioneering event, which is Black October. October. In 100 years of history, the university had not made a specific event to discuss racial issues. And that was put in the center for the memory of the university. We went into the book celebrating the 100 years of the university, relating this event. And this event continues to be alive, being one of the most important in the institution, because this Black collective appropriated itself of this event, and that's been doing very properly every year. It's a representative entity of the questions the students carry in them, and an expression for the poor and Black students, some who have come from, who migrated from Portuguese-speaking countries. So that's Angola, Mozambique, etc. So these are new experiences that have another kind of action and another profile for being a protagonist. The second point that popped up in my talk is to think of the way to make the competitions for getting into the university on the part of the faculty. There are no title holding Black professor, and this affirmative action is very recent in graduation. It's even more recent in post-graduation and inexistent in the competitions for getting into the faculty. So this discourse in the university can't be present only when you look at the profile of the students, but also as to the composition of the faculty. And this, for me, is fundamental, because when we think of profiles for students, teachers, and faculty, we think of a specific repertoire that fold out into diversified curricula and events that should be diversified too, and academic projects with high concerns. It is important to value the repertoires, the life experiences, and the knowledges that are beyond those who have been crystallized and established and universalized in the university. So I think I would like to see a university that incorporates its practices in its competitions for entry and in its projects this notion of diversity, and that dialogues not only with the moment we're living in, but also the context of this country. You can't be global if you dialogue only within a sterile context. You have to be global for issues that make sense presently to everybody as to what the notion of the university is. And these notions came up in the participants of all the participants in the dialogue today. Yes, thank you, Erica. Let's talk a lot more about this later on.
Well, Erica, muito obrigado mesmo.
Erica, thank you. Really, I thank you. I really thank you for this complimentation and this compliment, and also this will have given impulse and bolster the reality of other members participating here. I would like to round up or wrap up conclusions in this event. This will not finish anything, and I'll switch to English now.
We should, as Nikki also came up with, again with Muntadas, and Erica as well has mentioned that relationship, and even Mariko with her talk that started the day, making a sort of the difference between what is an art research and an academic research. And it's interesting that when, by being in an interdisciplinary platform like the Institute for Advanced Studies, of course, we look for these different ways of looking at the university, how the university is structured, and the power structure of the university as well, because as Ari was mentioning regarding our institute, it's the first time in its brief history, 30 something 36 years of history that we have a woman as deputy director. Some of the times we not even had any woman in the board. So now it's something that really has something that has changed in the way that the institute sees itself, and we can see that also reflects on how the university is being managed. But changes in universities are always very in a time scale, in a very small and in a very delayed process. But sometimes I want to go back to this relation between the arts within the university. And that's what Muntadas brings us very clearly. And you have reacted to that in different ways. But and David, for me, came up. He was not. He doesn't. He did not very much strengthen the art research based work, but he mentioned the interdisciplinary stance and the importance of being at the Intercontinental Academia in that regard. How you see that in relation to a future model of universities? Are we in the right track? Art is as different from other researchers or types of research. How you see this relationship between, in a broader sense, like Nikki has also mentioned, that is art and architecture, of looking at this relationship with the planning of the university, the design of the university. How you see this contribution of the arts, or is it as special as sometimes it also looks at itself and saying, no, we are different, or are we talking more about interdisciplinary context here, or relationship?
I would say that of all the parts of the university, it's art that has the greatest potential for imagining a plurality of possible worlds, for imagining that role of the university in creating something different from the problematic thing that we have. Art is where the real power lies. Art is also the way in which we can most easily escape the obsession with propositional knowledge that Western science brings to the table, so that we can most kind of pluralize the kinds of approaches to the world we have. So art ought to be the driving force that the sciences, that the humanities are come after. I would place art central in those terms, and I think it's a real problem with the instrumental nature of how we construct universities today that is not the case.
Mariko, Erika, Nikki?
I would just second what David said. I think that if we think about art or architecture as ideas taking form in the world, right? It's the embodiment of sometimes an ideal, sometimes a question, sometimes a protest, sometimes just an observation or a delight, right? Then putting these things into form, putting many of them into many forms, and giving us something like the former Prime Minister of Iceland used to talk about politics as toys, right? Just get all the toys out of the toy box, try them all out, have a look, see what you've got. And I think in the present, we don't have enough toys. We've got one or two very heavy-handed models, and we need to play, but in a rigorous way. I don't mean that there's a lot is at stake, but we need more toys to look at and examine, and art certainly can fulfill that role, architecture as well.
We're obsessed with sticking diamonds onto the single toy that we have instead of playing with all the possible toys.
I might answer this from a different angle, but I think, I teach students at art schools. And when I do, I always feel, and my university, Kansai University, doesn't have a department of art. And so I feel that the way they function is very different. And I feel the students that belong to the art school or department of art is they always have to produce something. They always have to make something, literally. So I think it's a very healthy thing to have to create all the time. But then at the same time, what they lack is theory, for example, or studying, or learning the history backgrounds, or thinking about philosophy, etc. And and vice versa. If you're just thinking about theory and not using your body or your hand, it's just really unhealthy again. So this balance is, I think, the most important. It's the most difficult, but I think it's the most important thing.
Erika, you mentioned the importance of literature into your social based research. Why literature? You have chosen literature.
Porque a literatura... Well, because literature produced by the peripheries came up as a great novelty for me to think on the context of the peripheries. In my graduation, I was inclined to mundane studies with a study on focus with the periphery, on the periphery. And that's when I found out that there was a party being organized at the margins of the city with people who affirmed themselves as peripheral, and by their social cultural actions, that seemed to be novelty for me, something to be explored regarding the periphery sites. And that collaborated with aesthetic collaborations for literature from their social profiles, but also, on the other hand, it seemed to be very significant that to think on the peripheral territory to be duly studied by urban studies, coming from their precarities, lack of services, lack of infrastructure, urban infrastructure, or given their associative life, to rethink the entrance of peripheral persons in the public scene, coming from the focus on culture and more appropriately in literature. So it was my chips put on actualization or updating of social reality in my research of 2010, was it? I thought of the periphery of São Paulo. I amplified it to a doctor's degree strategy for cultural production in the periphery of São Paulo, coming from a significant group in the cultural history of São Paulo, which is fronteiriça, and also weekly reunions in Boteco, region that is very marginalized and punished by violence and poverty, and postdoc research, one that I concluded, that thought on professionalization in the cultural area for peripheral youngsters, thinking of different artistic languages. And even though I'm the supervisor of the Eliana project, I'm a postdoc person in author's degree, as the author of my thesis on peripheral actions with a focus on peripheral literature. So I would like to answer the previous question, that if you look at my path, I think that my first participation was on peripheral studies on literature in periphery. So I am very much accustomed to participate. Well, participating in this event today is good for me because I'm accustomed to see how art serves to us to think several issues and not issues related only to art. So for me, it's a pleasure to think on how the artist can use his actions to think of other spaces. For example, the academy, provoking researchers, students, and researchers coming not only from their own issues, but also not only the process, but also the product that has been generated with a number of videos and records on these issues. That's what I wanted to say. Thank you, Erica. And Muntadas also.
Muntadas, he came in. Hello. Oh, but maybe to finish, to close this very amazing encounter that we managed to build up. Oh, here he is. Muntadas, you want to say something?
Bueno, desgraciadamente no he podido.
Well, unfortunately, I wasn't able to hear all the chat because I was giving some classes, but what I want to talk about, as in the first day, I thank everybody for the participation to this debate, and I believe that it is a fundamental debate for the setting up of directions of the project about academia. When this project was made in the United States, took place in the United States, I thought of the North American context. And outside the American context, the North American context, it is very important that the roundtables and these discussions should contribute to discuss and promote a model other than the North American. That's good only for the United States, not even good for Canada. It's a pity that we have some discussions following the project are fundamental, right? I understood and noticed that the first roundtable, the very important issues were the access and content. Access and content. What is the access to Latin American universities? How do you get into it? What were the reasons for that? Mostly economic, of course. That's the great problem. And the contents. What is taught? What is received by the students? And what is circulated? And how does it circulate? It's important to debate these. And each contribution is a grain of sand to configure these discussions. Thank you very much for having participated. Thank you.
Thank you, Muntadas, for coming and bringing your last words. And unfortunately, you couldn't be with us from the start. But we are going to continue this discussion on for us here in Brazil after lunch. So at 2 p.m. BRT time, world time. We will continue on that, but I would like very much to each of us to say your last words and last comments you have in relationship to this encounter. And Ari, please feel free also to join in this closing moment of our morning here in Brazil.
From my part, just to thank all of you, but Mariko, Nikki, Dave, and Erica, but especially Muntadas and you, Martin, for putting this session together. I I was very touched by all the words, and I think that Muntadas' question and artistic work and your organization capability made it happen, and also obviously your dialogue with Muntadas about art. Thank you so much. I think it was really an event that enhances what the Institute for Advanced Studies came 35 years ago, 34 to 35 years ago, and gives us idea also how to move forward. Thank you so much.
No more words?
Okay.
Great.
Thank you so much for this discussion. I'm really interested in your works. Today, I think maybe like the key word would be the art of the periphery or the peripheral. And I don't know if David's kayak is, I think it's a form of art as well. And I thought that was very interesting because, you know, that if going to the peripheral by the kayak and using your body and also a lot of imagination as well. And that sort of decolonizes or decontextualizes the context that we normally are in. So maybe the kayak would is everything. Thank you.
I want to thank all of you for sharing your work today. Erica, Mariko, David, and Muntadas, particularly for setting this artifact into action, into consideration. It's been a pleasure. I leave with lots of questions, more than when I came in, and that's always a pleasure. So thank you so much.
I would say a very similar kind of thing. It's been a humbling privilege to be able to explore the world of these ideas over the last few days, and especially today with such excellent other speakers whose, like I said before, whose talks were really profound and incredibly humbling to kind of be alongside. I would maybe add that one thing we didn't kind of discuss that much today, and that I think is an important context for challenging the kind of colonial power structures and the kind of knowledge systems that we have, is the kind of ecological question. The way of kind of diversifying our thought, pluralizing what the university does precisely to get outside the destructive logics of the system that we currently live in. So that's the one thing I would add. But again, thank you very much to Muntadas and to Martin for putting this together, and to everyone involved.
Quero também agradecer.
I would also like to thank everybody for the learnings that I've had here. I'd like to thank you for your time, for the questions that were put forth. As an academician, as an academic person, I think of the points, what are the answers that remain, what the questions are. We have 2 questions to continue with our projects, to provoke our colleagues. And I remain here with this wish that beyond this circulation in the virtual world, that we have the opportunity of following this exhibition presentially, face to face, whenever possible. Thank you.
Last words in English.
Últimas palavras.
Oh, obrigado, Érica. Gracias, Muntadas, por inspirarnos. Thank you, Nikki, David, Mariko, to be with us in Brazil. We are still in a sort of institute, even though we are totally virtual in this moment. And as Érica mentioned, we really hope that we can be together in one of the next stages of your project, Muntadas, be it anywhere. I don't know where it might be. but as you have seen, it has been provoking many questions and interesting responses. So once again, thank you all for this moment. I would like to also thank the translators that have been with us this morning, all the Institute of Advanced Studies staff members, those that are here, and those that are in the backstage supporting us. And if you like to stay for a little while, Nikki, David, Mariko, Erika, and Ari and Muntadas, we can talk in the backstage, because I think we are now really finishing this session. Thank you again, the audience, and hopefully this discussion will be with us for quite a while, and as an inspirational piece for those that think and have this critical relationship with the university. Bye-bye.